Everyone, I'm here with Mike Bonem. Mike is a consultant and coach working with churches and ministries. He's a former executive pastor and also the author of several books, including Leading from the Second Chair, and the book that we're going to be talking about today, titled The Art of Leading Change. Hi, Mike. How are you doing?
Hey, Marcus. I'm doing great. Good to see you.
I'm so glad to have you with us today. And I would love to hear just a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, like you said, I'm a consultant and a coach. I work a lot with and love to come alongside churches and ministries and their leaders to really help them to get clear about God's vision for them and then to move towards that vision.
That's great. Wow, that's great. And I'm excited to kind of unpack what that,
Yeah.
some of the ways that that we can talk about that and understand how that works. So let me ask you a quick little get to know you question here as well. And the question I want to ask you today is: if your life was a book, what would its title be?
I think the title would be Chasing the Rainbow. I'm a pretty driven person. I've always had a lot of drive and maybe sometimes striving more than driving. I would differentiate that. That striving is trying to impress other people. Driving is trying to accomplish something. But there's always been something out there that I've been chasing after I guess on my best days, just to really serve really well. On my worst days, it's to, stroke my ego.
Well, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. I think we all got a little bit of that, at least. Chasing the Rainbow. Is that what you said? That's a great,
Chasing the
that's
Rainbow.
a great title. I love it. Okay. Well, and then the follow-up question is, what would the title of the current chapter of your life be?
The current chapter would be Finding the Pot of Gold, and it would have a subtitle that is, It Was There All Along.
Okay.
We're in a good season of life in so many different respects. But a lot of what makes it a good season is family and friends and being in a great church and my relationship with God. And, that stuff that was there all along, even when I was focusing a lot more on, chasing other kinds of career aspirations. And I still have plenty of fuel in the tank and still do a lot, on the vocational side. But the best stuff is all those other parts of the pot of gold.
Yeah. Well, I like that. And it's been there the whole time. You've always had it, just didn't realize it, huh?
Yeah, there was several years ago, I read Ruth Haley Barton's Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership. And she has a great quote. Is it possible for a leader to have encountered God so richly that no matter what we are working toward here on this earth, we know we already have what we most deeply want, the presence of God, that which can never be taken away from us?
That's great.
And I think that's what that real pot of gold is all about.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I had Ruth on, I don't know, a year and a half ago to talk about Sabbath. Anyway, she's great. And I love it.
She really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about the soul of your leadership, but in terms of the art of leading change, which is your book.
Change, yeah.
I'll hold it up for anyone who might happen to see this. So the book is kind of structured in terms of 10 different perspectives. That's what you call them. Important things to consider is maybe another way to talk about it as you're leading change. And I could list all 10 of them and they would be worth listing. I don't have them all in front of me right now, but I wanted to talk just about 2 or 3 of them, just kind of depending on how much time we have. But let's just start with a general question. Tell us why we need this book.
Well, I don't think we've ever been in a time when we haven't needed to lead well, and leading well always involves change. Yeah. But certainly in 2024, the amount of change that we're facing or that we need to be facing in churches and ministries is so much greater than it was 10 or 20 or 40 years ago. And so, Robert Quinn in his book, Deep Change, says that we have a choice of either making deep change or continuing on a path of slow death. And none of us really want that slow death path, but we kind of kid ourselves that we can maintain the status quo and not do the hard work of change and things will be okay. And that's just really not true. And so, churches that are doing well still need to be thinking about change. Churches that are struggling need to be thinking about change. Ministry, and the same for any other kind of ministry.
Yeah, this is definitely a time for having to lead change wherever you are. Yeah.
I had so many conversations with pastors in the first 12 months after the pandemic began, where in one way or another they said, hey, this, as hard as this is, as terrible as this is, there's also an opportunity here because we've shut everything down and we can start it up differently when we come back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reality was, in most cases, when they did start back, there was this enormous gravitational pull to go back to doing everything that we were doing before, the way we were doing it before.
Yeah.
And I think it just goes to underscore how hard it is to lead change effectively, and yet how important it is.
Yeah. Did you say before there was a pull to go back, or after there was a pull to go back?
Well, as they were coming back, they had all these great ideas about how they would do things differently.
Right.
But then, you started bringing people back in, and you had a core group that just said, "Oh, we just want to go back just the way we were."
Right. And that is very hard to do. And it really is interesting. I'm just reflecting on my own experience. I transitioned to a new church just about 2 years ago. So kind of near the tail end of the worst part of COVID. And it feels like, to me, so, I mean, they were very low attendance when I started there and have sort of slowly rebuilt. But it's funny. It just seems like it's a totally different church, even from when I started. So many people have not come back, and so many new people are there. And so, anyway, there certainly was when they interviewed me, they said, "How can we, get certain people back?" Because that's kind of that wanting to go back to how things were. I was like, it's really hard to get people back who've left, and so it's really more about looking to the future and what's next. Anyway. So this is a time for leading change, and let's just kind of talk about a few of the perspectives, two or three of them. We'll see how much time we have. But the first one you talk about in the book is the importance of trust. Perspective one you called lead with trust.
Lead with trust.
And so let's just talk about why trust is so important for leadership.
Well, I would start with a question back to you, which is, would you choose to either follow or lead alongside someone you didn't trust?
I would not.
And most of us would. Now, we may be in situations where, there's, we don't really trust the leader, but we're not going to change churches, or we're on staff and, I don't have another job waiting for me. And so I stay with them. But you don't willingly choose to work alongside someone that you don't trust. Yeah. And if you are in that situation where you don't trust them, you certainly are unlikely to give 110%. Yeah. And yet, to lead, to accomplish what we want to accomplish in leadership, we need a group of people, really a large group of people that are committed, they're excited, they're on board, and that only happens if they trust us. So the real question is not, why is trust important? I think that's. I think the bigger question is, what do we mean by trust, and how do we build it, right?
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question. So so is trust just people doing everything we say they should do? Is that what trust is, or what is trust? So
I think in ministry particularly, trust is confusing and complicated because a pastor or ministry leader, but I'll talk specifically about pastors for a minute.
Okay.
Often will have a posture that says, "Hey, I'm a pastor. Of course you should trust me."
Yeah.
I actually read and believe the 10 Commandments. I try to follow the 10 Commandments. I've sacrificed a lot to go into ministry. I'm inherently trustworthy. And what pastors don't realize in that scenario is, often there will be people, maybe many people in their congregation, who have been burned by a previous pastor who was not trustworthy. And the other thing is that trust has a lot of different layers to it. Do I trust you to bring me back change if I give you a $20 bill when you're going to the coffee shop to get a cup of coffee? Well, I trust you to do that. I don't know you. I've never met you before today, but I would trust you with a $20 bill to bring me change and a cup of coffee.
Right.
if I were a little bit younger and my kids were still at home, would I trust you to watch my kids overnight?
Mm-hmm.
No, I wouldn't. I don't know you that well, Marcus. I mean, I'm sure you're a wonderful person, but no, I don't, and the same is true with leadership is, and so trust has a lot of different dimensions that we have to pay attention to if we're really going to be able to lead change well.
Yeah. And so then the next question might be, well, two sides of it. How do we lose trust? And then how do we build trust? What are some ways that we might lose people's trust?
Well, I would, rather than saying lose, which sounds a little bit more like an on-off switch, I would say, how does trust get eroded?
Oh, okay.
Which is a gradual process. Now, we may do something. The pastor who has a moral failure instantly loses trust,
right?
And most often loses their job as well, right? But I'm more concerned about the slow erosion of trust that can occur. When you said you were going to do something, but you didn't do it. When someone asked you to make a hospital visit and you were too busy and you didn't do it. When Todd Bolsinger, who I know is a thread who runs through this program, says without trust there is no travel, and it's all the little things that we do or don't do that cause people to say, "Oh yeah, I would actually follow this person because they've earned my trust." And so we have to be constantly, and again, not my idea, but putting deposits into the trust bank account, because there will always be things that are taking deposits back out of it that we do either intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah. And so trust is built primarily, would you say, just by following through on what you commit to? Is that?
It's follow through. The other thing that I didn't say that's important is there's always a relational component of trust. It's really hard to truly trust someone that you only know at a distance. And so, for pastors, investing in the relationships, particularly with the key leaders, is absolutely essential. Because you're going to turn around and you're going to ask them to help you lead some initiative, or to go to bat for you when people are upset about a change that you're talking about making. And they're much less likely to do that if you haven't invested in the relationship in a way that they will trust you.
Right. And so then when they do trust you and you need to lead change, something that maybe folks are uncomfortable with, or maybe just don't know, it's a fear of the unknown or concern about the unknown. Maybe just sort of paint a picture for when we have the trust of our congregation, what does that look like when we do need to lead change?
One of the things that it looks like is they give you the benefit of the doubt. And so you say, I really think we ought to undertake this new initiative that's going to reach out into the community. And some people are kind of skeptical, and they're thinking, didn't we try something like that before? Or I'm not sure that makes sense. We don't have the resources for it. But they will be much more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt in those circumstances. They're also much more willing to roll up their sleeves and be a part of implementation when they trust you. When they don't, one of the really interesting dynamics that can occur in a church is if a major new initiative is put before the congregation for a vote, which I know would happen in some traditions and not in others, but let's just play along with that for a minute. You might get a high percentage of people that vote for it, but the real indication of trust is that they actually get involved in it. And so you get an 85% yes vote, but then nobody shows up at whatever the thing is or signs up to help make it happen. And that makes me think, so were they really committed? Did they really trust you in this? Or did it just seem like, we'll vote yes, but we're not fully on board?
That's good. I was just thinking, it's also more than just doing things to get trust. You know what I mean? I was comparing it in my mind as you were speaking to like saving for retirement, which is you do a little bit over a long period of time and then you have what you need when you need it. But it's also less scientific, so to speak. It's more artful, and it's more about being the kind of person who is trustworthy than just being a person who does things to get people to trust you, so that you can get them to do what you want them to do later.
Right. Oh yeah. People will smell manipulation from a mile away, right?
Yeah.
And so if it feels like I'm just doing this to get you to do something, they'll smell that out very, very quickly. It's really about, a lot of it is about integrity. Right. And people have a pretty strong sense of that one way or the other.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Let's talk about another perspective. So that's trust. Leading with trust is critical when you're leading change. Perspective 4, I thought this one was really interesting and a great way of describing kind of the concept. You said the perspective is called "heavy loads require strong teams," and I was like, yeah, that's a good reminder. Let's talk about, just kind of unpack that. So, what do you mean by heavy loads? What does a strong team look like? Just unpack that for us.
Sure, and let me just back up for a second. One of the things that I tried to do with all 10 of the perspectives was give a leader just a really short phrase that they and their leadership team could unpack, and maybe would internalize. And so rather than, because what this one is really about is, building a team that's going to accomplish what God is calling us to do. But heavy loads require strong teams, I hope, is a little bit catchier and more memorable. And so what I'm talking about there,
probably why I was drawn to it for this conversation. Yes, good job.
Good, it worked.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about there is that there will be times in our leadership, moments in our leadership, where we need to undertake something that's going to be hard. We know it's going to be hard. And I want to suggest 2 different kinds of hard in this context. One is, it's a really big project. We're going to launch a new worship service. We're going to overhaul our small group ministry. We're going to really have a significant partnership with the local elementary school, right? Any of those are significant undertakings that are just going to require a lot of work to make it happen well. A different kind of hard is, it might on the surface seem like a smaller change, and yet I know there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. Either one of those is a heavy load. We're going to flip the times for our contemporary and our traditional worship service.
Yeah.
Right. So on paper, load. That looks really easy.
Sure.
Right. I mean, all we're doing is just swapping the times. Right.
Yeah.
No big deal. Right. It's a huge deal. We all know it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Right. And so either one of those is a heavy load, whether it's a big initiative or it's something that's likely to encounter some significant resistance. And in either case, you don't want to be the one leader who's trying to do all of that work by yourself. So you need a team around you. You need people with different gifts, people with different perspectives, people who and people who would be really passionate about helping to make that happen. And so if it's the partnership with the local elementary school, it needs to be somebody who loves that idea of getting out in the community and rolling up our sleeves and being the hands and feet of Jesus. If it's a schedule change, I want it to be some people from whatever pockets are going to be most resistant. So I want somebody from the choir in the traditional worship service to be a part of that strong team who understands the need for making the change and who can then help to carry the load specifically with the choir to do that. And so when I think about heavy loads require strong teams, it's, those bigger initiatives that will help, that are changes that will help us to move towards God's preferred future and the people that can help us to get there.
That's great. And so, so the team does not include resistors at this point. Have you kind of worked through who's resisting and who's not? And
so there's a whole nother perspective in the book that says resistors are not the enemy.
Right.
And we probably don't have time to go there today. But what I would say is I don't want, when we get to implementation, I don't want someone on the team who still is not convinced.
Yeah.
Now, when we're in the planning stage or the dreaming stage, I actually think it's valuable to have people who are skeptical or who are not fully on board at first,
right?
Because they're going to help surface those questions that we've not thought of.
Yeah.
So, if you like, let me just go to the example again of changing the worship schedule. If I don't have somebody from the choir in the conversations about what this is going to be like, and then I will almost certainly make a serious mistake because I just hadn't considered that perspective adequately.
Yeah.
I might sit there and think by myself, well, I bet the choir is going to react this way, but I'd much rather have somebody on the inside who's going to help me think that through.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you do want people who are not, I'm going to dig my heels in no matter what, but people who are going to bring different perspectives and challenge you, especially in the planning stages.
Yeah. That's great. I'm just thinking again, just how helpful it is to think about, okay, here's a project or here's a project, and we just need a strong team for this. It's just, I love it because it gives me, as we were saying earlier, it gives me that language when I'm thinking about something that we got to do at the church, even just to share with our elders or our leadership team or whoever it might be. Okay, guys, we need a strong team for this one, and people understand that. And anyway, I just think it's very helpful. Now, okay, so any tips on how to build a strong team when you get to that point?
Yeah, well, first, know yourself. I mean, some people just tend to, their default is to go it alone.
Yeah.
And particularly for those individuals, being willing to recognize that tendency and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to get myself in trouble if I do that. What we often do when we go it alone is we see that in the short term, I can accomplish more in the next week or maybe even month doing this by myself.
Right.
But if I try to, so a tip is to think, where will we be a year from now if I do or if I don't enlist a team to work with me on this?
That's good.
I think that getting a strong team, it is valuable to get different perspectives, different gifts in the room. And so being really intentional about that, which often means we don't just go to the same old people that we tap on the shoulders a lot. Finding people who would be passionate about whatever it is, particularly if it's a new initiative that we're trying to launch, is valuable. So those are a couple of the just simple tips, I think, for helping to build that team. And then and then the last thing I'll say is empower them. Jim Collins in Good to Great talked about the less effective leadership model is a genius with 1,000 helpers.
Yeah.
And that's the model where I've got all the great ideas. I just need some people around me to go and do my bidding. The more effective leadership model is one that's much more collaborative, more shared leadership, and where the others are fully empowered.
Yeah.
And if you're going to recruit the right people to be on the team, then you need to release them to do the work that God has called them to do.
Oh, that's good. That's good. That just seems like healthy leadership and healthy ministry and being a healthy church. It
is. I mean, 1 Corinthians, Romans, they, the parts of the body, analogies say something about that. And yet sometimes we don't. I know. We rush through that.
Yep. Tell you what, let's talk about one more perspective, and then there's something else we want to talk about as well. But one other perspective that I thought, well, they're all great, but that I thought would be worth just mentioning here is perspective 8, where it's really about communication. The title of that is "What They Heard, Not What You Said."
Yeah.
And so, well, let's unpack that. Why do we need to consider what people hear if it's not enough just to say what we got to say?
Well, I mean, so I'll preface it by, we've all had the experience of somebody coming up to us and saying, well, you didn't tell me, or why didn't y'all make that announcement, or I didn't know this was happening. Communication will always be a work in progress.
Yeah.
So I'm not suggesting in this perspective that we can nail it where everybody will understand everything. They won't. They won't.
Yeah.
But we do need to be really intentional about the communication, because if we think, look, I've said it and it's on them now to hear it, then I'll go back to what we said earlier. We may start the new initiative and look for the people who are going to show up to help us make it happen, and nobody's there because we didn't communicate adequately. We may have done everything else right up to that point, but then if we didn't communicate in a way that they hear it, understand it, and understand what they are being asked to do, then it'll be a failure.
And so what let's ask about tips again. What are some ways that we can be sure that we communicate in a way that people hear? Like what are some things that maybe pastors and churches tend to overlook in terms of communication?
There's a great analogy, and I can't remember who wrote this. Again, I borrow liberally from other people who are really smart, right? That when it comes to communication around significant issues and changes, think of it like a roller coaster, and the pastor and the other key leaders in the very front car of the roller coaster. And so we've come over the big hill, and we're all the way at the bottom preparing to go up the next hill. And there's other people that are in a car that hadn't even quite crested that hill yet. And so while we're anticipating going up this one, there's others that, their heart's in their throat because they're about to go down this big drop. We often shape our communication thinking about what we already know, and we don't think about all the people who haven't been in the internal meetings. So one thing is just really trying to think through who's the audience, what do they know. A second thing is we've got to realize in the church that no matter how incredible our communication is, if it's Sunday morning, at best a third of the people are there. If it's an email newsletter, they maybe read it a third of the time. And so over communication becomes, or repetition of communication becomes really important. And then the other thing that I think would help pastors immensely would be if they would create some feedback loops. How do you intentionally listen to figure out what people are hearing? So rather than just saying, well, we announced it, why don't we just say, well, what did you hear? What do you think the purpose behind reorganizing our small groups is? Why are we doing this? I don't know. Y'all just woke up one day and decided to do it. Well, obviously my communication didn't land then, right? And so I've got work to do.
So one of the challenges for me is that repetition of communication, because you get to a point where you feel like you're annoying people with your communication. It's like, I've said this, I feel like I've said it 1,000 times, but the reality is they've only heard it twice. Right. And so, and it's like, it's like commercials, sometimes I see a commercial 100 times before I'm like, maybe I'll give that thing a try, So, and then I really appreciate the thing about feedback loops. And is that, so a loop to me sounds like you've kind of got a system in place for getting information back to you. Does that mean it can go through other people, or do you need to be in touch with the people that you're wanting to get feedback from? Or are there variations on how that could work?
I think it could be any of the above, but really what I think of is, who is in your, for lack of a better word, I'll say your inner circle, that you've asked them to really have a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the congregation and to bring back that kind of information to you. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't get it directly, but, a lot of times people are reluctant to give honest feedback to pastors, and yet they'll tell their friends. I don't know why they're blowing up my small group right now. So, the friend says, okay, so I think we've got a communication problem here. And can it be, can you do stuff like surveys? Does that count as? Yes. Surveys, people get over surveyed. So I tend to recommend that churches use surveys sparingly. But if it's important, absolutely do a survey.
I'm just wondering if there are like some sort of tools that can be used for that, or if what you're really talking about is the personal conversation kind of feedback.
I think it's both. I think it's the tools. I think it's the personal conversations. I think it's, you pay attention to, who's showing up, and, what does that tell me about how effectively we communicated and how we might tweak it. I would, the online communication is so important these days. I would want to have somebody in my orbit that really understood that well and knew how to pay attention to what was working or not working from a digital communication standpoint. Like that's not me.
Yeah.
But I would, back to our strong teams.
Right.
I would find that person, and there's a good chance it's just a digital native. They don't have to be on your staff.
Yeah.
But they understand that world, and they could help to tell you that's not the feedback loop per se, but they could tell you what seems to have traction and what doesn't.
Yeah.
What are people clicking on or paying attention
to? That's great. That's great. Yeah. So I really appreciate the conversation about these particular three things. Let me name them again. So lead with trust. Heavy loads require strong teams. You also mentioned resistors are not the enemy. Then what they heard, not what you said.
Not what you said. Yeah.
And of course there are some others. And then if we work through all these different perspectives, then we will be able to easily and perfectly lead change in our congregations. Yes?
Yeah, that's not true, and I know that's not true. What I hope is that someone who really internalized the 10 perspectives would make a few less mistakes and would be better, more adept at dealing with the challenges that come along. No, it's never going to be easy.
Right.
But if you make a few less mistakes and if you can handle the challenges a little more effectively, then you're a lot farther down the road.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so important because, I mean, as you mentioned, we're constantly having to lead change, especially in this post-pandemic world. And of course, even prior to that, we were all having to lead change in sort of a post-Christendom kind of world. Now, there's something else that you're doing these days, in addition to the book that you just wrote. And just kind of frame it, Todd Bolsinger, who's our executive director here at the Church Leadership Institute, he's written a couple books on adaptive leadership, which is kind of what this book is about, and some of the tools for that. He says that people won't follow you off the map, right, if they don't trust you on the map. And so leading change is about adaptive leadership, but then there's also the technical leadership, the technical competence aspect of that. And so let's just shift to that for a few minutes. You've just created a 6-course certificate for Fuller Seminary on the business of ministry. And so tell us a little bit about why that's important for us.
Well, it's just what you said, Marcus. Todd's transformation leadership model in Canoeing the Mountains says it has those 3 interlocking circles. And we think a lot about the adaptive capacity. But the other 2 circles are equally important. It's technical competence and relational congruence. And technical competence, if we don't essentially pass the standard in our churches on technical competence, people are not going to give us permission to do the adaptive work. And technical competence, I think a lot of people in ministry immediately think about, well, I've got to be a good preacher. Yep, you do.
Yeah.
I need to know how to show up and handle funerals and pastoral care needs and hospital visits. Well, yep, you do. I need to be able to answer questions that people have about what the Bible says. Yep, you do. And someone also has to run the church and do the business side of the church. Right. And in mid-sized and smaller churches, the pastor has to be reasonably competent in those areas too. So finances and managing personnel and dealing with committees and planning processes, all of those are part of the technical competence that a pastor needs to have to earn the trust of people, so that they'll follow off the map.
Right. I love it because when I went to seminary, I didn't have a class on how to manage church finances. I didn't have a class on how to lead personnel, human relations. No, what is it? Yeah. HR.
HR. Human resources.
Human resources. That's it. Anyway, all of that. And so, I've always depended on someone with more expertise than I do on, I hate spreadsheets. Let me just name it. I hate spreadsheets, And so our finance elder is fantastic because he always writes up a narrative version of the budget every month. And I'm so grateful for it. I'm like, Scott, thank you so much. Thank you for this, because it just helps me to my eyes not to glaze over when I'm looking at a spreadsheet. But that also tells me that I need to continue to grow in my ability to read spreadsheets, and grow in competence in that regard.
Right.
What do you say to someone, though, who says, well, the church isn't a business, and that's the wrong thing to focus on? We don't need to worry about those things, will take care of themselves, or whatever they might say. What do you say to that?
So I would agree with them on the first part of the statement, right? The church is not a business. It is different than a business.
Yeah.
And there's a business side to it that we do need to take care of. I really come at this from a stewardship standpoint. People are giving us money, and they expect us to be good stewards of that money. People are giving their time. They expect us to be good stewards of the time that they give us.
Yeah.
We've hired people onto a staff. If you're a church that has more than a pastor on staff, they want us to be good stewards of how we develop and lead those people. And so it's a stewardship issue.
Yeah.
It's not a business because we'll do it differently than a business does. But business has learned a few things about finances and human resource management and planning that we can learn from, and we can adapt, and we can use to be better stewards of that which God has entrusted to us.
Yeah.
And so, it's not a business, but the person who says, let me say it a little bit differently. The pastor who says we don't have to worry about that, God will just take care of it in a finance committee meeting, has eroded trust, to go back to something we talked about a minute ago.
Oh, interesting.
Because that finance elder or the people sitting in that meeting have had, in all likelihood, an experience before with a pastor who was, not doing anything illegal with money or even immoral, but made some poor financial decisions because they had that attitude.
Yeah. And they have likely seen the results of bad financial decisions, even in their own workplaces and their businesses and in their homes. And so wait, you can't manage money that way,
Right.
So yeah. Can you, if you happen to remember them, just what some of the modules are in that course?
Yeah, we sort of touched on it, but the first one is to this question that you asked a second ago. The title is The Big Debate, Is the Church a Business? And so it sets the framework really for the rest of the course, because I think we do need to wrestle with that question and figure out, how much do we want to use business practices and how do we think about that? Yeah. And then the others get into specific aspects. So finance is one, planning is one. There's one on personnel management, one on committees and governance, and then one on infrastructure, including both the facilities and kind of the soft systems that we use to run the church.
Yeah, that's great. And I think I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to do it because it'll be great.
My target audience is exactly our target audience is just what you described. It's pastors who have gone to seminary, or even if they've not gone to seminary, right? Yeah. But they don't have that in their background, in their education, in their skill set. Yeah. They may or may not have other people around them who do spreadsheets, who understand HR policies, and yet they need to have some base level of competence to earn the trust and to be able to lead well in their congregations. Yeah. And the goal on this is to get them beyond that base level of competence, not to ever become a financial expert or an HR expert, but to help them to be better equipped for those sorts of issues.
That's great. So by the time this episode is released, the certificate will actually already be available. And so people can go to, I think it starts May 1st is what you mentioned.
Should release on May 1st, yeah.
May 1st, which is in our future, but our listeners' past.
Right, so, I get it.
But where can they go? Do you know where they can go in order to access that?
It's going to be part of Fuller Equip. So I know it's going to be, fuller.edu. I would type in business of ministry or look on or Fuller Equip specifically.
Okay. And I'll mention it in my outro, which will be coming in just a minute or two.
Awesome.
So,
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, Mike, this has been great, and I'm so grateful just for all the stuff that I learned from your book, and I'm grateful for what I'm going to learn when I hopefully soon do the certificate, work through that. And if people want to connect with you or find out more about the work that you're doing, is there any place that they can go?
Yeah, just hop online to MikeBonem.com, and Bonem is Bonem, so www.mikebonem.com.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you so much for being here, and just thanks for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a real pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation.